So, good afternoon to our audience and to our speakers. Firstly, most importantly, thank you so much for turning up and tuning in so early in what promises to be, I think, another rollercoaster year. My name is Katrina Sickle, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for about the next 90 minutes. I'm going to navigate us all through this fabulous event from the comfort of my home office in Brussels. Now, as you all know, or you wouldn't be with us, this launch event is organised by the Platform for Electromobility, which brings together more than 45 organisations from across the stakeholder ecosystem, civil society, industries, cities, all transport modes, to promote and to help shape policy for a sustainable multimodal transport system for people and goods. Now, our aim today is to launch a rigorous study with the title E-Mobility, Inevitable or Not. The study was commissioned by the Platform for Electromobility, and it was undertaken by the strategic energy consultancy Element Energy. And the project also benefited, and it's important to give a heads up right at the start, from rigorous consultation with and feedback from representatives of industry, trade unions, think tanks, consumer organisations, and also e-mobility associations. So really a very warm shout out to them. We're going to hear from Element Energy's leader of the study in not too long, so I'm really not going to rain on her parade by divulging too much information about the nuts and bolts of it, because she is shortly going to give us those very pertinent insights into the findings. But suffice to say, it is the largest consumer choice study ever conducted in the mobility sector. And as its title makes clear, it aims to understand consumer preferences in the mobility transitions and how these could change in the future. In fact, this would be a good time to remind you all of our eloquent speakers who are gracing us with their presence today. So I think we've got a very simple speaker name slide. There you have it. So first of all, giving some top lines, as I said, into the findings of this great report, we've got a partner at Element Energy. She's leader of the report, Céline Cluzel. She started her career as a mechanical engineer, has worked in France, has worked in the UK for all sorts of automotive related businesses, and she joins Element Energy in 2010, specialising in low carbon transport technologies. And we also have three speakers for a panel chat. Here you see we have Emily Pans. She is Policy and Regulatory Advisor for the Swedish renewable electricity producer Vattenfall. And since January of this year, well, as you can figure, since just a few days, she's also chair of the Platform for Electromobility, but she was actually voted chair at the end of last year. We're also delighted and absolutely important, considering this is a consumer study, to be joined by the Director General of BEUC, Monique Goens. And as you all know, BEUC represents 46 independent national consumer associations in 32 countries. So its purpose really is to give consumer interests weight in the development of policies. And rounding off our esteemed panelists, we have Daniel Mess, who is, of course, member of the cabinet of Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, and among a host of other responsibilities, he is in charge of transport-related Green Deal policies. But very important you stay with us for the whole journey, because we've got some closing words from Renew Europe MEP Caroline Nagtegaal van Doorn. She is Deputy Coordinator and member of the Committee on Transport and Tourism, and importantly, Shadow Rapporteur on the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation. So please do make sure you stay with us, because she is going to put the icing on the cake of content in the closing minutes of this event, and I promise you will be on time. Couple of things, and then I'm going to leave the floor to our first speaker, who actually joins by video. You can make your voices heard in two ways: on Twitter at any time, #InevitableEV, and in the Q&A channel of this event. Yes, not in a public chat channel, just the Q&A channel, please. Golden rule, super short, Morse code length. Say to whom your question or comment is addressed. What will happen is that the lovely technical and policy guys behind the screen are going to answer some of the technical ones pretty much in that Q&A, and then send some of the others our way so that the speakers can address them in the latter part of the event. That's it from me. I tried to be as speedy as possible without speaking too fast because I know it's early days in what is a very cold, well, at least here in Brussels, New Year. Let's get stuck in then. Here now to set the scene with some big picture EU context is the Commissioner for Justice and Consumers, Didier Reynders. As I said, he has prepared some opening remarks on video, so now is the perfect time to hear them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be with you to launch today's event. Let me start by congratulating Element Energy and the Platform for Electromobility for the release of their very interesting study on consumer preferences in the mobility transition. The key question is, are consumers ready for electric vehicles? Looking at the results of the study, the answer is quite simple. It's a yes. More and more consumers are choosing electric vehicles. In fact, the electric vehicle fleet in the European Union doubles every year. This is a strong signal, and we expect registrations to continue growing and indeed accelerate. Market forces and the Commission's proposal that from 2035 on, all new cars and vans registered in the European Union should be zero-emission vehicles, should be a driving force for this growth. Today, the most advanced market for electric vehicles is Norway. In 2021, 64% on average of all new car registrations were for battery electric vehicles. But we are also seeing strong momentum in markets within the European Union. For example, in Germany, the Netherlands and Sweden. In the past, the availability of such vehicles has been a constraint. Few were on the market. Now, all vehicle manufacturers are investing heavily in zero-emission vehicles, thanks also to the policy setup in the European Union. And the availability of different models is growing at an exponential rate. It is also worth noting that 7 of the 8 nominees for the 2021 Car of the Year are electric vehicles. Yet, as demonstrated in the study, consumers are ready to invest in electric vehicles provided the right framework conditions are in place, namely attractive vehicles, acceptable costs, supportive financial incentives, and an adequate recharging infrastructure. It is therefore crucial to look at the remaining limits to ensure equal access for consumers to these new means of mobility. When it comes to prices, some studies show that for cars with an annual mileage of 20,000 kilometers, an electric vehicle is often the cheaper option when taking the total cost of ownership into account. This is a reflection of the lower fuel costs and much lower maintenance costs for battery electric vehicles compared to traditional cars with combustion engines. But it is true that today most buyers still look at the initial purchase cost. This is why many member states have introduced policies to reduce the gap by providing tax incentives or purchase subsidies. At the same time, the price of batteries continues to fall, thereby helping overall affordability. Today, manufacturers are starting to bring more affordable electric vehicles to the market, and many forecasts expect purchase price parity with conventional cars around the middle of this decade. This would be welcome news. Beyond the price, we also have to consider issues relating to the supporting environment. For instance, consumers must be sure that they can easily recharge their vehicle wherever they wish. Currently, within the European Union, we do not have a sufficiently dense recharging network. For this reason, the Commission has tabled a proposal for a regulation on deploying an alternative fuels infrastructure. It proposes mandatory deployment targets for recharging. The aim is to ensure that an adequate, interoperable, and user-friendly recharging infrastructure is available throughout the Union. It is complemented by a Commission proposal for a revision of the Directive on the Energy Performance for Buildings. And this would ensure that private recharging points are available in office and apartment buildings. In addition, we must consider the unfolding sustainability crisis and the role that consumers are able to play in the green transition. To respond to the challenges and unlock the consumption potential, we need to empower, support, and enable every consumer to choose sustainable products alternatives. We need to ensure that consumers have proper information about the environmental performance of products at the point of sale. And we need to provide them with better protection against misleading greenwashing practices that are at odds with the Open Green Deal. I'm happy to say that new initiatives from the Commission are in the pipeline, and we aim to adopt these in the coming months. Consumers tell us repeatedly that sustainability is a factor in their purchasing decision. These new measures will provide them with more certainty and clarity. This, the economic and environmental benefits of the new CO2 emission standards for consumers, and our initiatives to support recharging should ensure a large uptake of electric vehicles in the years to come. I will conclude by wishing you a fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much to the Commissioner. I'm just going to make sure that I've got there we go. I've got my correct view. Thank you to the Commissioner there. And interestingly, what's particularly resonates for me to moderate this event is I am exactly a very imminent new car buyer. And I would wholeheartedly agree, and I'm sure Monique will bring more into the discussion later, the role that consumers can play in the green transition is critical. But for that, we really do need proper information on the environmental performance at the point of sale, I would agree, and really not to get caught up in greenwashing practices. So the Commissioner used the words there, empower, support, and enable consumers. So that very much, as I said, resonates with me. I think we've had enough lead up to this report. I think we need to now get some of the top line findings. So can I ask to join me on the screen, please, the leader of the report, partner at Element Energy. There you are, Céline Cluzel. So lovely to have you with us. Thank you very much. I very much see this as your baby, actually, and if that's the right word. And also, just interestingly, as a prelude, there were studies carried out by Element Energy, similar ones in 2015 and prior to that 2011, and it really has been a change in consumer preferences has really been seen, as I understand. There has been an evolution.
It has, and it's quite fantastic, and I'll comment on that in my presentation actually, but it is one of the most surprising results that I would flag.
And interesting, just to say, because we were having a chuckle, you and I, with Monique before this, and she was saying, oh, I'm going to be a bit provocative and say, is the market actually ready for the consumer? And I know you're also going to touch on this, but just one specific framing question. Given the fact, you know, that BEV sales are increasing rapidly, I mean, I think the obvious question to ask is why is a consumer survey needed at this stage?
Biting question, but fair. Look, I'm happy every month when I see the sales of EVs going up and up, but I do think we do need to understand the purchase behavior. Two key reasons, I would say. First one, we are out of time. It's climate emergency, so we cannot play trial and error with policy. If we do understand what makes people buy a technology over another, we can make sure policy focus and money is directed to where it's most useful to accelerate the sales. The other reason is once you understand purchase behavior in a more academic way, I'll say, you can estimate how other technology will fare that don't exist yet, so you cannot rely on looking at what's happening. And I'll touch upon the topic of synthetic fuels in my presentation. So 2 key reasons, I hope, in the context of the Fit for 55 policy package being refined, are compelling reason to have done that study.
Okay, so I am actually going to give you about, I think we said sort of, 12, 14 minutes to talk our audience and our speakers through the main outcomes of the report. Can I remind all of you good people who are watching, which is an impressive number, can I just say 177 and climbing, that questions for Celine, happy for you to stick them in the Q&A, not the public chat, the Q&A channel. But unless there's something really compelling for her to answer swiftly at the end of her presentation, she will join a dedicated Q&A after the panel discussion, which follows her presentation at the end, and will deal with any questions that come in then. Don't forget #InevitableEV if you want to share your thoughts with the wider community. So I'm going to leave now, Celine. I'm going to enable you to present, and I will pop back at the end and listen in off screen. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Katrina. Right, I'll go straight into what we've done. So we've surveyed 2,000 new car buyers in 7 countries mapped here. Do revise your flags because we use flags in graphs later. Together, they make 80% of car sales. So what's special about the survey is not just the size, it's the fact that it contains a choice experiment. So what that means is that we don't just ask people, will you buy an EV, and take the answer for granted. Instead, we make them take several choice questions. So there's an example here. It's more because it's not about the details, about the concept. They have to choose between 2 types of electric cars and a petrol or diesel car. And we vary the description, about what matters, driving range, price, etc. And every time they choose something, they tell us how they trade off attributes, because we never make them choose something that is the cheapest and most performing technology. Because we do that a high number of times across a sample, we can then build a statistical model on how people purchase things. And one of the key advantages is that you can then look at what would be the sales if price decreased that much, or if driving range increased that much, etc. One of the other interesting things when you've got that purchase behavior model is that you can look at the inherent preferences for bias that people might have for technologies. And I'll talk about that with that graph, which is slightly complex. So let me take you through it. Here, what we do is that we look, considering what we learned from the choice experiment, what would people choose if they had to choose between a battery electric vehicle, BEV, a plug-in hybrid vehicle, PHEV from now on, or a petrol diesel car, if else was equal. So it's just the name that changed. And I know it's a bit weird to think they're equal because they're not, but to make them equal as much as possible, we look at the case where the same price, the same running cost, people have access to public and charging infrastructure, private and public, and the driving ranges are fairly high. So if people didn't care about the tag EV, non-EV, we will see here that the 3 colors will be equally distributed. That's not the case. What you can see if you look at the oil markets is that people overwhelmingly prefer battery electric vehicles, and no one wants a petrol or diesel car, or else is equal. So what does that mean? It means that people today buy petrol and diesel cars, not because they prefer them, it's because they're cheaper. And it's an important distinction. Like, as Katrina said, we've done some work before, and if you look at the case of the UK, the second flag here, back in 2011, the share of people who have said my preferred choice is EV or PHEV, or else being equal, was only 2%. I mean, at that stage, there were some consumer segments to which we could have given an EV for free, they would have still not wanted it. In 2015, that share became 22%. Now it's 100%. So yes, consumers are ready for EVs, but EVs are not quite ready because we're not yet at purchase price parity. So let's look at the real world now. So here, let me explain the title of the graph first. We're looking at the share of demand in the case where people can choose between 5 different technologies for petrol car, diesel cars, hybrid, PHEV, BEV. So they can choose between all of this. And if indeed all these technologies are in the showroom all the time and there's no supply constraint, then the share of demand becomes the share of sales. But because we haven't looked at supply, this is called the share of demand. What you see on the graph called baseline is that blue line, which is the BEV, becomes the highest one in 2025. I repeat, by 2025, BEV will be the most demanded type of car. That is tomorrow. After that, things just continue improving and all the other powertrains are fairly low. I have to say there's several things that make that baseline conservative. First one is that we're not accounting for the fact that some powertrains will be removed from the showroom. So we're not including the fact that several countries are looking at phase out of petrol and diesel cars. Secondly, there are a lot of city level policies such as low emission zones. They come under several names, but the principle is the same. They will influence things that's not accounted for explicitly here. For instance, in France, the zone à faible émission will forbid brand new diesel cars even to enter cities. The third reason why these things might be quite conservative is that we take the attitudes of people as measured in 2021. As I explained before, we've seen that attitudes change as the technology becomes more mainstream. So actually the attitudes could shift even further from PHEV to BEV, for instance. But the fourth parameter that makes this projection, at least in the eyes of some people, too conservative, is because we use our own price projections for the different type of cars. And there's some publication from serious organizations that predict that battery electric vehicles will become cheaper than what we predict and will actually reach price parity earlier than what we predict. So the upfront price parity before 2028 for all type of cars. So we've run the model with that cheaper BEV case, and that's the graph on the left, and we see things go even higher and faster. That is the core of the findings, that purchase price is a factor number one in the consumer choice. Improving driving range and charging speeds are really secondary factors. And now I'm going to make a statement that might upset some people, which is that charging infrastructure does support the gross PV market, but it doesn't generate demand on itself. So yes, charging points are needed, especially for people who don't have anything else to charge, etc. And charging points that we see are already useful, as in they will be used. They will see some queues, or queues will get worse so if we don't install more as the market grows. But these statements are different from saying the sales could be higher if we had much more charge points now. Nice, two different statements. Price is the number one barrier. However, the situation with charging infrastructure is closely linked to parking. So let's have a look at the parking situation. These statistics are quite exciting because this has never been measured before, because this looks at where car-owning households park their car, which is different than the general households. So if we look at the one called all markets, you can see that most people fall into the blue categories. So 59% of people, that's the people who have access to the preferred form of charging, which is home charging, because they have a garage or driveway, or at least very little barriers to have charging there. So the first good news. There is an outlier though that we need to flag. Spain, is much lower there. The concept of driveway seems to be a rare luxury in Spain. So here, public charging infrastructure will have a much short-term impact on the EV sales, for instance. But even if we look at people who don't have a private or street, so the other 41%, some of them are in places where charging infrastructure is not that hard to install. But even though people who are reliant on public charging infrastructure, if you do provide public charging, they're only 12% less likely to buy a battery electric vehicles than people who have a garage. 12% is lower than what I think people will have guessed, but I think it's good news, and it reflects the fact that, again, cost is much more important in the purchase decision. I'm going to change topic now, but cost is still going to be the core of it. Namely, talking about the so-called e-fuel. So concept of e-fuel shortly, the synthetic fuel, you go from pure CO2, renewable electricity, you go through a recipe, quite a few steps, and you can reproduce the molecule that is petrol-like or diesel-like. Because there are several steps to make these molecules, it's expensive. It's more expensive than petrol and diesel refined from oil. So just by saying that, I've told you many times that price matters, just by saying e-fuels are going to be an expensive fuel, should be obvious they're not going to be attractive to consumers. However, there's still some people lobbying for the case of e-fuels for cars. So it's worth reiterating again by looking at what the choice models tell us. So this graph looks at consumer demand for all the vehicles that contain an engine, so petrol, diesel cars, hybrid, and PHEV. The gray line is the line I was shown before, although it's hidden at the start. So to start with, this type of cars are the dominant in the market, but they go down. Now we looked at a case in red where we make some e-fuels and we say this is what people will choose to buy when they buy a petrol or diesel car. And that fuel is made from European wind. Because it's more expensive, actually accelerates the demise of the cars fitted with an engine. Now, if we want to be pushing the story even further, we look at the case where we will make ourselves depend on e-fuels that is relying on Middle East solar electricity. So I repeat, relying on Middle East energy. That might remind you something. In that case, there might be a scope for the e-fuel to become cheaper than petrol in the 2040s. And that's why you see the orange line departs from the gray line, but it doesn't change the story. People want demand suddenly again to drive a car fitted with an engine because people have embraced the transition to electromobility. That's the message I leave you with. Yes, EVs are inevitable. Many people have contributed to that study, and I thank them. A little thank you to Open Accent, who were allowed to study the survey for us in all these countries. My colleagues at Element, many of them helped, but a special shout out to my colleague Charles Erdley, who not only is delightful to work with, but he did a sterling job in this study. I think that's it, Katerina. I hope I've maintained my 10 minutes.
You've been fabulous, and you did not speak to you. Can I just say, did I actually say BEV before instead of BVs? Did you notice me say? Because my sister's called Beverly, and I thought I had this brain moment. I was sitting behind the screen, thinking of emoji face with him back, thinking, goodness.
If you did, I didn't notice.
Okay, good. You were thinking about your presentation. Super fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure there will be some questions, and of course people were already very excited and asking, and I was going to let them know that the report will be available to download on the platform's website directly after this event, because you did have a few questions coming in on that. We had also a comment, a very nice comment at the beginning. Hang on a minute, there we go. We've had some dismissed there. Yeah, we just had a comment there from Matty Ray. The number of EVs has doubled to 1.2 million vehicles in the Nordics from 2019, 100% growth in just 2 years. Let's take, Celine, do you want to take just one question that's come in from the audience? Why don't we just honour that now, which is, what about the environmental and economic impacts of servicing motors, batteries replacement and recycling, increased cost of energy? Do you want to say something, or do you want to come back on that in the Q&A? Your
I think quickly, so there's some facts and then there's some perception. None of these things mentioned about maintenance costs and vendor footprint, etc., should be opinions. That should be facts, but people react to them in a different way because there's a lot of stories around. The fact is, here we looked at how people would choose, and some people who in the past didn't like a BEV, one of the reasons might have been because they thought, well, the environmental footprint is not as good as it's hyped up to be, for instance, among other reasons, right? But the fact is, today what we measure is that people don't have a reluctance towards EVs, and that's all we can say. If and then indeed, continuing in the question, maintenance costs are lower. That is a fact. Environmental footprint is not zero, because nothing is zero when you extract something from the ground, but it's been for many times that it's lower than other cars once you drive less than a year on average mileage, for instance. So yeah, I'll keep it short at that.
Okay, all right, thank you. And of course, there is so much around this that will come up, I think, in the panel discussion. Certainly, where Europe sits in terms of the Raw Materials Alliance, the Battery Alliance, the policy that is supporting it, looking at creating that kind of closed loop and when it's going to come about. So all of that, I think we will look at some of those aspects which touch on that question that came in. One more for you before I say take a breather off screen and come and join us at the end of the panel. Now, you in the course of your career, you've done lots of analysis of conventional electric and hydrogen vehicles. You've looked at technology costs and performance characteristics. There, of course, in your top lines, you referenced synthetic e-fuels and you were looking at how consumers saw that. So your experience and the findings, I think, in this report also begs the question, what about hydrogen fuel cell cars? Do you think they are a viable alternative to BEVs for consumers?
Okay, look, I'll give you the short and brutal answer, which is not viable, and then I'll explain why. In my results, I didn't include them because we don't think they are an option in the showroom today. There's only 2 models on the market, so clearly today they're not viable. But we also looked at, would they be viable in the future? So we looked, we ran the model by saying, let's imagine in 2025, anyone could choose a hydrogen car. What will happen? What happens is that the market share stays niche. It's like less than 10%. It's actually published in the report, you'll see it. The reason is that, yes, hydrogen cars have advantages, faster refueling time and greater driving range, but people don't value these properties enough to want to pay the premium price. That's why they're not viable option.
Okay, thank you. And doubtless there'll be more comments on that and more questions. Now, what I will say, and you will notice you'll have the time to look, there is a couple of questions that have come in for you, but I'm going to give you the time to formulate a response. And when I ask you to come back, perhaps we can deal with those. And also you can have a quick comment on what you'll hear in that discussion with the 3 eloquent speakers I'm going to ask to join me shortly. So thank you so much, and I'll see you again in not too long. Right, so let's move straight on to that panel discussion. And also for those of you who might have joined us late, because I can see the numbers climbing now in our audience, do stay till the end, because we do have Renew Europe MEP Caroline Nagtegaal van Doorn, who is going to sort of put the icing on the cake of the content. So don't go away. I promise we're not going to go but a few minutes over time. And so to our panel discussion, can I ask to join me now, Policy and Regulatory Advisor at Vattenfall. She focuses, well, it's a no-brainer, on electromobility, and also since the start of this year, chair of the Platform for Electromobility, Amélie Pans. So if she can switch on her camera, that would be fantastic. Also member of Frans Timmermans' cabinet, Daniel Mess. He's in charge of transport related to Green Deal policy. So if he can also switch on his camera, and thank you. Yes, you can do that lovely regal wave, everybody. It's always helpful. And there we have it. Monique Goyens, who is Director General of this European Umbrella Consumer Organisation, BEUC. Absolutely critical to have you also with us today. So as you know, I have a few questions up my sleeve. We need to leave time for audience questions. There's already stuff coming in. I asked you to kindly be concise in your answers, and I know that you are all game for that. Obvious first question, same one to all of you, and I'll start with Amélie, if I may. Your initial response to the study's findings, please.
Yes, thank you, Katrina. And I have found that 2 findings of the study were really interesting in the current debate. First, the study showed that reaching a price parity between EV and ICE will really support the transition to electrical vehicles. And second, the study confirmed that e-fuels as a dead-hand solution for a consumer. And then on the price parity, we see in the study the clear importance of upfront cost to really unlock the mass and democratic adoption of electrical vehicles. That's why production should continue to increase, as it will reduce the price of electrical vehicles compared to internal combustion engines. And as we know, with an increased market, zero-emission vehicles will also become more affordable. And also, we think that it's really important also not to leave anyone behind. And having a second-hand market with EV could allow all consumers to participate in this transition. And that's why we think the electrification, of the corporate fleets is really important. But also to support the market uptake, what the platform believes is that the ambition of the CO2 standards for cars and vans are the most relevant policy tools. Compare, for example, to extend the EU ETS in the road transport, and the CO2 and the emission, the CO2 standard for cars should really be strengthened. Also, the study confirmed the feasibility of the new intermediate targets proposed by Rapporteur Huitema. as they will be met by strong consumer demand. That's why the European Parliament should really strengthen and multiply the intermediate targets in the CO2 standards for passenger cars. Second point, it was on e-fuels, being a dead end for consumers, because even at a seemingly unreachable price parity with battery electrical vehicles, consumers will still opt for the electric option. And this is why we believe that the fuel credit should not be introduced in the CO2 standard for passenger cars and vans. And that's our main finding of the study.
There's me on mute. Sorry. Thank you. I have a million questions, but I will not ask them because it is my job, since I've told everybody else to be concise, to pass directly on to Daniel and to say, right, your first reaction, and maybe taking into account anything that you've just heard from Amélie there. What do you say? You're in the pub with me and you say, Kat, this is my first reaction to the findings in this report. Let's have a listen. Thanks.
Well, first of all, I think that there are many people in boardrooms of car makers and politicians that see this as a strong encouragement, this result, because this reflects the choices that many in the market are already making, and choices that also reflect some of the proposals that we have made to shift to more electric mobility as the dominant mode on our roads. But I do see, because you said earlier, yeah, the question should well be, are the markets ready for electric mobility? I would also make a variation on that and say, like, you know, are we as decision makers ready with our framework to make this happen, electric mobility that is suitable for consumers? Because the results of the study may be encouraging, but there is a lot of work to be done to get there. Because one thing you saw from the study, for instance, is that, you know, purchase price is very important, but lots of other things need to be equal to in study terms. You know, there needs to be charging infrastructure. The battery life needs to be okay, so people have the comfort that they can drive quicker. So there's really a lot to do. It's a lot of work, and I just want to say we should not underestimate that. I think that the results are extremely encouraging, but I think that there's a lot of work to do to make this happen, both in price and the other things that I just mentioned. And when it comes to the charges and that kind of thing, I think that for consumers, the best service that we can give them is 3 words: make it simple. Make it simple to drive your car through Europe using your common bank card that everybody has. Make sure that that is also in place, that people feel more comfortable to make the shift that they say they want to make.
Thank you. Simple and convenient. I mean, I suppose you could say absolutely, you know, are we ready with our framework as policymakers? One could also say the good thing in about this report is it's kind of sort of puts the wind up you, right? I mean, in theory, that's also it. And I think we'll hear, it'd be interesting to hear Monique's point of view. Can I just, because we've had a question come in for you, Daniel, so just before we hear from Monique, you know, now looking, you know, AFIR and HDB, could you give a forecast? So we're looking at that regulation, looking at HDB, could you give a forecast on the installation of charging points for the electric heavy duty vehicles? So for example, buses throughout Europe and also in Belgium. I mean, even Brussels, if you want to localize it that much.
Well, I can't give like an exact forecast of that, but what I can say is that it's very important. You know, when we made the proposal on the rollout of the charging infrastructure, we really saw that as our responsibility, that proposal, because you can ask the car makers and the truck makers and the bus makers to be really ambitious in making all of these zero emission models, but then we need to play ball and make sure that the infrastructure in there, and it's particularly a challenge for trucks and for buses. I think that the good thing about our proposal is that's now in Parliament, and I hope that Parliament also agrees, is that we chose to be, we set a benchmark to say, you know, for each zero emission model on the road, be it a truck or a car, you need an X amount of charging capacity that is available so that you always have the comfort that it's enough. Now, there will be a discussion, obviously, because this is a proposal on whether what we post is enough, but the thinking behind that is, no matter how ambitious the outcome is on the zero emission models that come to the road, by saying each member state needs to have in place the charging capacity to match the number of zero emission trucks, to match the number of zero emission buses, that you're safe, that there's comfort that it really happens. So I think that, you know, that's the discussion to be had, whether these targets are enough, because then forecast of exact numbers, you know, they're very relevant for market players. But I think the comfort is more important, that you have this this link, that it is enough. And I think that's also the good news. What I understand from specialists, but I'm also happy to hear views from others, is that you often get the question, oh, the energy grid cannot cope with this, with especially the trucks and the buses. We've seen that there may be some challenges, but many of the challenges are local. So when we think now about the solutions in depots, you know, that we make sure that when the trucks are parked and the buses are parked, they can offload their excess energy into the grid. If we think about that up front, I think that even that challenge we can master. But again, it's a lot of work.
Thank you very much. Let me come to you, Monique. So you've got the lovely, it's a nice thing to come last, so to speak, of the panelists, because then you can take into account what they've said and also put out there what hasn't been said. So your first reaction, and obviously very much from the consumer perspective to this, the findings in the study.
Yes, and I have a double reason to give the consumer perspective, because not only am I the director of BEUC, but I am also the proud owner since 3 months of an electric car. So I can give you first-hand experience of what works and what doesn't work, and the headaches and the passion that you can have of an electric car once you have understood how it works. So first of all, maybe my reaction to the report, to the study, I think it's those results are really very promising, and they also confirm previous research that we undertook with Element Energy on consumers and electric cars. What we see is that electric cars become cheaper and cheaper, and that consumers will favor them over conventional cars if certain conditions are met. And indeed, the first hurdle to overcome is the high upfront cost. It's an investment. I bought a mid-range car with a mid-range battery range. And well, you need just to decide that you're part of the solution, and you need really to make an important bet on the future. And there really, I think what has made already those cars cheaper than 2 years ago, there has been really a decrease in the price and an availability of cheaper models, above all, was the CO2 standards. So this is smart policy making, and the only thing that we can ask is go further with those CO2 standards. The stricter those standards, the more cheaper electric cars will be made available. So this is, I mean, I totally agree with the previous speakers. This is a major piece in the puzzle towards the green transition. And the second point, indeed, the stress about the charging infrastructure. You need to be able to charge your car, and there is a lot of wrong perception, can I say. It's not so complicated for most people. I charge my car once a week in my house, don't need a wall box, just a normal plug. I mean, depending on your profile as a driver, of course. I'm not a taxi driver. And this is something that you need to debunk also. So as has been mentioned, important information about how to charge an electric car, and then again, smart policy making, where and this is part of what has been proposed by the Commission under the Energy Performance of Buildings proposal, where there would be a chapter where new, for example, office spaces or shared parkings or shared garage need to have charging structure. This is really very important. And a third point, you cannot only charge when your car is, in your garage or in the parking over the day when you work. You need also to be able to travel long distances. And there is where the new regulation on alternative fuel infrastructure should really set very high standards when it comes to charging infrastructure. And so policy making is key. Consumers are ready, I'm sure for that. And I really would like to come back to your first remark, Katrina. It is not that consumers need to be ready for electric cars or electric mobility. It's the system that needs to be ready, because the consumers will need to make it happen. But they need to make happen so many things for the green transition to succeed. The way we move with a car or in other types of transport, the need we eat, the way we eat, the way we heat our homes. So make it as simple and convenient. I'm just repeating the messages, so we are quite aligned this afternoon in order to make the transition the most speedy ones, because we are in an emergency situation.
And I would also agree with you also to pick up on, and interestingly, because I said to you, I'm thinking, what is my next car? And that would be something that I would immediately think about. Oh, crumbs, charging. So it's interesting to say, I think you used the word debunk. You said there's some wrong perceptions out there. There still does need to be work done on some of those issues, just on that. And then I'm so aware, because I've only to let me get another couple of questions for each of you out there before we invite Celine back and then move into a really speedy, short, sharp Q&A. Celine talked about, said charging infrastructure does not generate demand, but obviously there are differences in different countries and in this report, but as I understood it, it could impact it in the future if the infrastructure doesn't keep pace. So it's not generating the demand, but we do need to keep an eye on it because it could have an impact.
Yes, I think the more electric cars you have on the market, the more infrastructure you need. If that doesn't follow the pace, then there will be people queuing to get their cars charged, and you will have a lot of frustration. But what is, for example, a debunk that I really would like to share? First of all, you don't need a sophisticated wall box for most of the people. So that's €2,000 you can already save on your investment. But also, most people, most families, and that's research that has been made and that you can find back in our on our website. Most households don't need outside charging, so outside of the home, 5 days a year. So this is not a lot. So one should not overestimate the stress linked to the range anxiety.
Thank you. And let's just stick with that. If I can come to Amélie, if I may, and this looking at what was mentioned by respondents, that publicly accessible charge point deployment has to keep pace with EV uptake. We've agreed on this, it will be slowed down. So you've got this EC regulation on deployment of charging infrastructure. How do you feel about that regulation? Is it going to do its job? Is it going to keep pace with the uptake? Because, you know, there is, I think it's 40% of new car buyers in the coming years don't have that access to private off-street parking. So they will have to rely on those public charging points. So how confident do you feel in the regulation?
Yes, then on the regulation on deployment of charging infrastructure, the Platform for Electromobility believes that the Commission proposal, it's a good start, really. But to ensure that indeed the charging point keep pace with the uptake of electrical vehicle, as the study clearly shows, we think that the level of ambition of the mandatory target for light duty vehicles need to really be doubled. And regarding long distance journey, that's a different story, because what we can see that many EV owners now they have 2 cars, including an internal combustion engine vehicles to cover long distance. And what we can see also, it's some car dealer who give for free to rent for free an ICE when you buy an electrical car. And for the electromobility platform, this is really not the direction we want to go, because it's not going to help us to achieve the 2030 climate target. And that's why we think that for long distance journey, the target for the TEN-T comprehensive network should be brought forward to 2025. Right now in the regulation, it's planned to be 2030. And then we therefore really believe that in the context of the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, we need more ambitious target to the uptake of the electrical vehicles. That's our main point of view on the AFIR regulation. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me come directly to Daniel, and you can, I mean, hearing, you know, that's not the direction that you want to have this split, you know, to have, you know, ICs and also EVs. And for those who are concerned about, you know, the long range journeys and this sort of thinking, right, you know, that 10T target should be brought forward. You can maybe have a quick comment on that. Again, you know me, I've got my eye on the clock, but here's something else. And I'd like to pick up on what's come out of the report, this whole alternative technology pathways that consumers aren't very hot on. Now, when presented with the choice of synthetic fuels in internal combustion engines and hydrogen passenger cars, you know, there is this overwhelming demand still, and Celine also answered a question on that earlier from me. How on earth does the Commission balance these incentives between BEVs and other, you know, alternative fuels, and what's the thinking behind this balance?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And on the first question on whether our targets for the publicly accessible charging infrastructure were sufficient, I think that's actually really a question also for Caroline, because she will be one of the decision makers on that right now in the European Parliament. We went as far as we could with our proposal, because every proposal that we make, we do a very big impact assessment. What's the cost of making this proposal? What are the benefits? And the numbers that you have before you in our proposal were the highest that we had in the impact assessment. But of course, that impact assessment was done quite a while ago before we made the proposal. And now we have the benefit also of this study, new sales figures. So I guess, one can have a discussion then on these targets again. But it is really a question for Caroline, who is one of the people in charge of looking at our targets. And I agree with Amélie that this finding in the study on the e-fuels and the cost of those for the consumers, that is one of the very important findings in this study, because this is a discussion that of course you hear a lot, and I understand that there are parts of the transport system that have to make a big change and potentially have to do something else. I mean, in the supply chain of what the cars that we currently have on our roads, and then people tend to look at these e-fuels. And what I'm going to say about that is, we deliberately made a proposal for CO2 standards for cars where we didn't give a place for these e-fuels, and that was not done for ideological reasons. That was a very rational choice, given also by one, the cost of the consumers, indeed, because also our impact assessment showed that no matter how you turn it, by 2040 or 2037, these fuels are still far more expensive than whatever we pay at the pump right now, and we already have a very difficult discussion on the price at the petrol pump with our new ETS proposed for emissions trading, and this would be that discussion on steroids. So that's an important finding. But we also need to make a transition that comes at the best cost for society as a whole. It is there are also indications, strong indications, that you need up to 7 times more wind energy and renewable energy to have these e-fuels in your cars rather than have a battery electric car. So that's a huge cost potentially to society. Pollution, that's not mentioned yet, but air pollution, you don't solve all of that with e-fuels. And no matter how you turn it, the electric cars, and I know that there are questions also on the environmental performance, and we need to do that, no greenwashing. But so far, we can all be quite comfortable that an electric car is on the whole better than the combustion car, and will remain that for a time. So I think that also in the market, people don't see the e-fuels as the predominant segment. Even the people who are arguing for them know that that the market has made a choice and that it's electric mobility. We just have to have a discussion on what is left basically there. But there we need to have, I think, an open discussion. Also, what the cost of society would be of doing this. One needs to have a frank discussion on that. And I think that the big study does confirm why many car makers are choosing electromobility as the dominant mode. There are figures that back that choice up. But I do think that what this also raises is that we have to do this responsibly. And I know that this is a consumer event, but we have to do this responsibly, this big transition. There are jobs on the line here. My own father worked at Bosch throughout most of his working life, one of the companies really affected by this big transition and shift to electric mobility. So I'm personally quite attached to this issue, as is my boss, Frans Timmermans, by the way, as well. We do need to do this responsibly, and we do need to have really a plan for the transition, because no matter how you turn it, there will be a big transition to.
Absolutely. And it's so that we've got 90 minutes and we could all be here till, God, I mean, easily the whole day talking about this just with the 3 of you. But absolutely, and your point there are jobs on the line, and interestingly, okay, there are jobs to be created, but in that transition there's job losses, and those jobs, those skills also need to be, the training in terms of battery production and other elements there also needs to be a specific training for that, to make that transition. It's not like that as well. So thank you for bringing that up on the jobs front. Let me move to Monique, and then I've got a last round for each of you. As you can see, there's lots of questions coming in, so do keep your eye on those. Monique, here we go. You said you use the words a proud new owner. I mean, that's good. It would be sort of not particularly helpful if you had bought an electric vehicle and then weren't very proud or happy about it. So 46% of respondents said they knew somebody who owned an EV, and 70% indicated that they own or they've thought about buying one. But the critical question is this proportion spread equally across social groups, and is there still that thinking? And if we're talking about perceptions too, but also reality, are EVs still really only an option for the wealthiest? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is certainly the top one concern for consumers, because there is one question in the chat about the top 10 of concerns. It's the price, it's the upfront price. And there is a perception that electric vehicles are only for the wealthiest. And this is to some extent, let's say, historically understandable. But we see, you know, there is now a Dacia Renault, 16,000 euro. It has a low battery range, but it can already cover their daily needs for a whole range of consumers, and in some countries it's the top sale. What is also very important, and certainly in countries like Belgium, is that the major part of electric vehicles are company cars, are fleet cars. So that means it's the companies who sell them. And the good news is that as a consumer, it's still a niche market, but it will develop very quickly. But as a consumer, you don't necessarily need to buy a new electric vehicle. And in our report, the report on total cost of ownership that you can find on our website, it has been demonstrated that in fact electric cars are the cheapest solution for second-hand and third-hand buyers, because the running costs are so low and the upfront price is much lower to start with. So there will, for the moment, there is still, of course, it's still niche, but there will be more and more company cars on the second-hand market. There will be more and more, let's say, private electric cars also on the second-hand market. So this is, of course, going to be accelerated if we have stronger CO2 emission standards, because then there will be also a cheaper cars to start with. This is certainly what we need to push, this combination of CO2 standards, alternative fuel infrastructure and charging possibilities. That's really the solution. But it will, in the decade to come, the electric car will be the obvious choice, also in terms of price.
Okay, I had a question, but I'm not going to ask it because I've got to be disciplined about leaving time for our audience. So, and it might come up anyway. Let me just ask a last question to Amelie, or a last of my questions to Amelie, and just have a look now at this parking issue, which we also talked about, and this, well, very high statistic, 88% of current EV owners who've got access to off-street parking, so home or office parking, and the studies that show this will most likely be the main type of charging, but almost 60% of new car buyers in the market studied have access to private off-street parking, so that's fortunate. So is a necessary condition to having private charging points, but it's not actually sufficient. So I'm sounding incredibly sort of not being very clear with you. How can we make sure that consumers are able to transform a private parking spot into a charging spot?
Yeah, then maybe something really important. That's we tend to focus a lot of public charging right now when you hear, but that's represent only a really small minority of the charging station, because when we can see that the daily charging will be mainly at home or in the office, and it's roughly 80% of the charging session. And then also what we need to keep in mind is like having a private car park. It doesn't mean that automatically it's a charging point is installed and easily installed. What we can see also is the driver who want to make the transition and this transformation. They often face different obstacles to have, for example, a charger to be installed. And for example, the time lag between the request for a charger and this installation, it could be long, or the installation of a charging infrastructure for tenant and condominiums, for example, or the lack of pre-equipment in collective electrical installation. And that's why the revision of the energy performance of building directive called EPBD comes really in the good time to address all these challenges and to ensure a minimum coverage of charging points. And what we want to see in the PBD, we would like to see the right to plug to all EV users across Europe, because the right to plug would really facilitate the installation of charging infrastructure for tenants and condominiums. What we believe also that smart charging is needed in all type of buildings, because it has benefit both for the electricity sector, but it has also a benefit for the EV users. For example, by allowing consumer to charge their electrical vehicle more cheaply when the demand on the grid is lower, for example. Then we think, yes, that the energy performance of building directive should really facilitate the access to private charging.
It's just said you're...
That's fine now.
No, I'm unmuted. It sees that. There we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. Let me come to you, please, Daniel, immediately, and talk about just let's get the Green Deal in here. I think that's important. That's also very much something you are engaged with. So here we go. Just, you know, okay, consumers, they want electric vehicles. Here we go. We've said upfront costs, most important factor. We think as costs fall to price parity with ICEs, that's going to only do good things. So what does the Green Deal do also to help push price down?
Yeah, one point was already mentioned by Monique. I think that, you know, our proposal for the CO2 performance standards for new car sales is really also a consumer proposition, because it basically means that car makers would have to make more zero emission cars and more models so that they become cheaper in the end. So that's quite important, that also like that ambition is retained in discussions. But what I think that the Green Deal brings as well, and that's perhaps like a bit of a bolder point to make, this must work for all types of households. The people that have their own houses, like my father-in-law bought an electric car, and it's not because he wants to do a favor for the Green Deal necessarily. He just also installed solar panels on his roof and realized, I can actually drive for free if I do this in a good way. So it's also cool bit on Monique and other colleagues to make sure that when we tell this to as a consumer proposition, that we say, you know, the total picture. But it also needs to work, of course, for the people who don't own their house but are a tenant. And then indeed, it's important what we proposed in our Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, that no tenant can leave another tenant behind or block another tenant when the tenant wants to have a charging point in the garage. I think that's a very important practical proposal that we've made. And then, of course, like the people who don't have any of those also need to be able to charge, and that's where the publicly accessible charging points come in. Purchase price, we hope to bring that down also with our CO2 standards for cars. And let's make sure that also these purchase incentives work for all households. The social climate fund that we've proposed can also be used by citizens to buy a first-hand, second-hand zero-emission car.
Or third-hand zero, absolutely, yes. As we heard from Monique. Interesting there. So this, you know, this preempting, you know, you can't block me if I want to install a charging point. That's so fascinating, because as you know, that is where the consumer, the citizen, all of us, the average Joe, gets terribly uptight. I mean, it's honestly, tree boundary issues will become a thing of the past. It's going to be private charging point issues. That just came into my head when you said, but when you gave that example there. A last question, please, to Monique, and then I can ask Celine back, and we can. I know that you lovely speakers are having a look too at what's coming in, so that you can have a think about answering. So the study shows that the ICEs are going to sell poorly from 2030 onwards, so it could be that automotive manufacturers are going to remove some of those models from sale. But critically, does the range of models of electric vehicles answer, do you think, all the needs that consumers have, both now and also if we're looking ahead to 2030?
I had to unmute myself, sorry. I mean, this decade is crucial. We need to make it happen now, and we really need to push I think it is like the name of the report. It is inevitable. So just let's make it. Let's go. Let's embrace it, because we will need to go for electric mobility. So we need to make electric cars the default option, and that means phasing out combustion engines and conventional cars as soon as possible. And I mean, I'm repeating myself, but if we need stricter CO2 targets, and we need interim targets in order really to push the manufacturers to very quickly review their offer in order to offer not only the high segments, the medium segments, but also the low segments electric cars. So this is really the way we need to push further, and this is really very important. And forget about e-fuels, forget about hydrogen. This is not a cost-effective, not an efficient solution. So, I mean, at least when it comes to private cars. And I would like to say, I really agree with Daniel. You need to give the big picture. It is not about just charging your vehicle. If you have solar panels, you indeed with smart charging, which is a very important part of the equation, you can really do a great job as a consumer. And your car can be a battery for your house. This is the future. So don't forget that electric cars last much longer than conventional cars. So there are so many benefits that we have not even been speaking about today. But there is a lot more positive things to say about electric cars than just not using fossil fuel anymore to move.
So what's your favorite, your one most favorite positive thing to say about electric vehicles then? Short. You said there's a lot more, just one. What's your favorite now that you're a proud owner?
As a consumer, I mean, it doesn't how do you say, there is no any pollution anymore when you drive it. It doesn't smell. It is very smooth driving. And it is, in fact, the batteries are guaranteed 8 years. This is longer than any car a conventional car is being guaranteed, and that means that they last much longer. So it's a long-lasting investment, and it's quite. You feel safe in doing that step because it will be part of the whole smart energy use of the future, and we need to embrace that transition.
I think that's what's very interesting, the whole joined up, the example that Daniel gave about the solar panels, this whole joined up issue about it is very interesting, which is probably not where the average consumer is at, but you see that picture, super fascinating. In terms of knowledge, I meant, not in terms of what they could benefit, I meant in terms of knowledge, not in terms of how they would see it. Right, let's crack on. Can I invite Celine back to join us, please? You must have been scribbling frantically or holding all of this in your head frantically. What I do say is, let me just give a heads up to the audience, because you've been so brilliantly energetic with questions. We might end 5-6 minutes late, so forgive us, but stick with us. I promise I'm not a moderator that bangs on and on and on. What I do ask the lovely speakers is to please, we treat this a bit like a brain box bingo game show. So top line answers to these questions, I'd be very grateful, and then we can answer as many as possible. So Celine, I'm going to sort of give you open stage for sort of 2 or 3 minutes now, because there are some questions you wanted to answer, and you can say which ones. And then just, I think before that, what did you hear? What most made you optimistic? What did you not hear and you might want to reinforce? And then which 1 or 2 answers would you like to answer? 1 or 2 questions would you like to answer?
Well, I mean, I thought your questions, which panelists, were really interesting, and the panelists, they covered everything. So I don't really want to repeat. I thought that was quite exhaustive. There's no like glaring missing. Maybe the one I will highlight again, and Daniel made a lot of answer, that is, the case of e-fuels not being any good solutions for anyone, and I'm looking forward to the debates on that, finishing and concluding the right way, I would say, at European level. So yeah, my conclusion is that well done on the excellent panel that covered everything apart from that. In terms of the questions to answer, Greg Archer, hi Greg, to happen to know him, did ask a question about our purchase price, is purchase price really the right metric these days? And yes, it is, because even if you lease the car, it's not a TCO, it still doesn't include fuel and electricity, you just spread the cost differently, and lease prices are a little bit up in the air regarding residual value in any case. But I didn't have time to go into that, Greg, today, but actually in the results we show, it's both private cars and company cars. And company cars, we model them on a total cost of ownership basis, and it's exactly the same trend. And obviously the cost of cars is the important ingredient there. So my short answer is it still stands, I would say. A minor point as well is even if people were to take a leasing, when they took a leasing, they first often look at the sticker price first. So yeah, so that was Grace's question. I don't know if you want
there's
to...
another one. There was were consumer attitudes to smart charging, because that's not part of the survey. Perhaps you can...
Yeah, so it was not part of this survey because there's so many things you can ask before people switch off, because it was already quite a long one. However, I can say that from past trials and work we've done for a UK distribution network operator that's going to be published soon, there's been quite a lot of work looking at that question. And the short answer is people are really accepting smart charging. There's no issues there. So yeah, so not study here, but we can tell you with confidence there's no acceptance issues around smart charging.
And let me jump. I think, Monique, you've seen that. So, you know, what is the big vision of on smart charging? And then I know that there was another question or two you wanted to come back on.
Well, smart charging is really part of the big picture of the energy future, meaning that there will be a digitalization of our energy consumption and energy services, and that is, of course, it is key to have it consumer centric and to have it consumer friendly. But if you really can design smartly your energy consumption as a consumer, where the car can be a part of the grid, of your internal, let's say, grid, this can be really something that will bring your energy bill down. Certainly, if you can combine it with heat pump and with solar panels. So, but it's an integrated thinking. As you said, Katrina, we are not yet into that, but this will be the future. And we need, us again, to create the regulatory and the policy framework that will make it possible for consumers to be part of that future, meaning that you need to support people in retrofitting their houses and making them energy efficient and installing the renewable technology. And also certainly with a special attention to those who are less affluent. It's not. It should not be a thing for a geek thing for the rich. It should be for all those that are in a condition. I mean, and now I say a technical condition to install solar panels. They should be able to do that, be they tenants or not. And that's something that is.
Whoever's tweeting, that's a good one. It should not be a geek thing for the rich. There we go. I've given somebody a nice tweet, a nice concise tweet to put out there. Just before I turn to Daniel, because I think, Daniel, you might have seen there's a question for you that's been posted in the private chat if you didn't catch it. Yeah, and you referred to this a little bit, that you would say a couple of words on it. Monique, this question from Matty Ray, do you have a list of worries or questions that are mostly asked? Maybe not the top 10 list of issues, because we might not have time for that, but some of the key issues, 2 or 3, that might have to be cleared to make an easier path for the consumer.
Well, very quickly, we already mentioned the upfront price. It's the battery range, which is a concern. It's where the charging infrastructure, where can I charge my car? It's how to pay, and the lack of interoperability. You need a lot of cards, and it should be in the future as easy to charge your electric car as it is now easy to pay with a debit or with a credit card to have petrol. That must be that's the line we have to take. It's another way of driving, because if you drive at 140 kilometers an hour, which is mostly illegal, except maybe in Germany, that of course will bring down your battery range very quickly. So you need to drive a little bit differently, a little bit more smartly, can I say so? And then there is all those questions that people have. Do I have to install a box in my if I have a garage, do I have to install a box? But I don't even get, I try to list 10 concerns. I don't get to 10. I have much more advantages, but I won't promote more electric cars as I already did in the previous minutes.
Okay, and thank you also for saying, yeah, 140 maybe just in Germany. Also, I would say in Moscow. I drove there back in the early 90s, and let me tell you, it was an absolutely horrendous experience. So, but yes, also high speeds there. Daniel, because there's a question that's come in that I know Celine would like to answer live, so I'm going to allow you to in a minute. How would you secure that charging is as easy as filling petrol and looking at EU roaming? Is that something you would like to answer? I don't know if you've caught that in the Q&A, Celine, but let me come to Daniel first. I don't want to confuse Celine. I caught that one in the Q&A and I said Element Energy. There you go. Where's your question? Did you have another question, Daniel? Yeah, there we go. How would you ensure that charging is as easy as filling petrol? Are you working on EU roaming?
I think that when it comes to like the charging infrastructure, and I think that's also like an interesting thing, I think also for people in the parliament to look at. I always say, you know, like our proposal is one thing, but what we all need to ensure is that the charging experience, especially along the highways and the public places, is so easy that the next customer could be a grandfather who doesn't have a smartphone and really comes from the train and really needs to be able to charge his car as well, because we tend to overthink a lot about like everybody that has all the subscriptions and the roaming. Very good if the market develops that, seriously. Very good if the market develops models where you have an app that allows you to charge with all the single providers and that you can roam just like you use with your mobile phone. That's very good that the market develops that. But I think that when it comes to the charging experience, especially in the starting years, we need to think it like that. The charging experience needs to be as easy for a grandfather without a smartphone to do as filling petrol into his car, which means a possibility to always pay with your bank card and a charging experience that is quick enough, 10-15 minutes to make sure that you have a comfortable stay, but it's not overly long. So voila.
No, absolutely, so critical. I was about to say bank card, or if you're in France, still a checkbook, possibly. I think that still just always makes me like, oh, when my mother-in-law is whipping out the checkbook, I'm like, my goodness me. But absolutely, so very critical you say that, because I had asked a question to Monique before in terms of, are we being fair from a sort of a social point of view? Are we hitting everybody in terms of accessibility, affordability? But age is absolutely critical. And I think, whenever one has conversations around mobility as a service, smart mobility, connected and automated driving, it's so critical to think of, we are not one homogeneous lump, are we? There is so many different needs in terms of consumers and what they are able to do and how they embrace sort of this brave new world. I'm going to come back to Celine again, but before I do, Celine, and it is your baby, the study, so it's good for you to be able to come back. Amelie, you have been beautifully quiet like a sphinx. Can I just do you the courtesy of asking whether you want to jump in on any of this, any questions you've seen come in, or what our speakers have said, what our other speakers have said?
Yeah, maybe something that we didn't touch the point, if I'm not wrong, it's like when we were speaking about e-fuels also, what we didn't bring forward is like also that a battery electric vehicles is really much more efficient than a vehicle powered by a combustion engine. And EVs only lose 10% of the energy in the motor efficiency, while internal combustion engines lose 70% of energy. Then that's also something that we need to take into account when speaking about battery electrical vehicles. And that's why also it's more easy. And also speaking about maybe coming back on the smart charging, I think indeed, as Monique Goyen says, it's really important because it could also give a consumer also the right price, because in the future you can think about like going home with your car and in your app saying that, okay, tomorrow I need to be in south of Belgium at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then everything will be done by the smart charging, and it will also help to balance the grid, to avoid that all the people in the same street will going to charge their car in the same peak hours, for example. And it's also, we could also adapt the price tariff with the people who charge in offload peak and things like that, that I think it's really important as well.
Just before I come back to you, Celine, if I may, can I just come to Daniel? Because, we've heard, about the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, all of these things around it. I myself had brought up earlier about the European Raw Materials Alliance, because there is a lot of work to be done also to keep a lot of this, particularly production of batteries, in Europe. And when I was reading up around this, I've heard that some are less perhaps optimistic about targets and saying, listen, more realistic is a 2040 target for the establishment of a really entirely closed loop supply chain. you know, and raw materials is obviously a part of that. I didn't know whether, because you said right at the start, listen, Kat, we've got our work cut out as policymakers, whether you wanted to comment on that, because it is, you know, there's a lot to get right at speed, and we know that the stakes are high in terms of time. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, like I agree, and I think that, you know, like it is a challenge, of course, that we have many different proposals, and you need to piece it back together to the whole picture, and really, hopefully, this year a lot will become clearer because the Parliament and the Council will have advanced on most of these things. I think that the key date in all of this, because that's what everything evolves around, is this date at which all new cars that are sold onto the market are zero emission, because that will give you in practice the date by which all of these other things need to fall into place. That will give you the date by which the charging infrastructure really needs to be up to speed to make sure that, you know, not only the first movers are able to charge, but that everybody, including the grandmothers and the grandfathers, can charge. And that will ultimately also give you the date where indeed your battery and your raw materials all need to be scaled up, because then you would have the planning certainty. You would have the planning certainty. The car makers need to move towards that. I do think that things are going quicker than many predict. It really depends on who you speak to, how realistic it is. But I think that hopefully by the end of this year, a lot will be clearer, and then everything will fall into place somewhere in that bracket that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to give Monique the floor, just because momentarily I think you might have wanted to add to something, and then I promise Celine can round off this, and then we're going to hear from our lovely MEP. So let me give the floor to you, Monique. Just briefly.
Yes, just very quickly to add something, what I forgot to mention, but you reminded me in your last remarks, Katrina. There is one additional element. It's not only about when you need to charge in a charging station outside your home. It's not only the bank card that we should need, but also we should have information about the price we need to pay. And you know, when you now go to a petrol station, the price needs to be displayed in the beginning before you use the machine, the petrol station. And this is, for the moment, there are huge differences in prices when you charge. Right. And certainly depending on whether you go fast charging, super fast charging, or normal charging, and it can quite cost a lot if you don't pay attention. So that would be another thing that needs to be also gotten right in terms of obligation for charging stations to display the price ahead of the use of the machine.
Thank you, Celine. Look, I've been kept saying I was coming to you, and then I kept keeping you waiting. So I think you wanted to make a comment on a couple of last questions. One was that the study shows that consumers are willing to drive electric, but price parity is key, come through technology cost reduction, could also come from car size reduction. Wouldn't it be interesting to complement the study on the consumer readiness with this aspect? That was
yeah,
one.
I mean, if someone wants to pay me to do a consumer survey, I'll do it. But on this particular point, there has been really nice elasticity studies that looked at. I'm thinking of one of the Department for Transport in Cambridge Economics, which looks at if that car size increased by X%, what is the percentage of people who will switch to a different segment? But more interestingly, recently in France and the United Kingdom, there's been citizen assembly, whereby you take normal people, not like us, or people who don't think about climate change day to day, and they get explained all the thing, and they get told when it comes to transport that things will have to change, and then ask them what would be reasonable. And when they ask, the citizen assembly, if they would prefer that everyone is forced to drive less, or forced to give a car, or one of the options is actually people are forced to buy smaller cars. This is definitely what people prefer, because they understand that will make sense. So there's an indication that there's some willingness, but there's not a proper behavior study. So yes, it could be interesting on that. And I will add, it would be interesting to understand what switch people away from cars altogether where possible in that respect as well.
And then a good question here, and a last one to finish on before I invite Caroline to step in and to join us. Absolutely. I mean, that's what you saw. There were. When I first talked to you, I said, were there any surprises in this study? But here's a question, if all costs were equal, there is a huge difference in the first choice in the case of, let's say, an Italian customer with an 88% BEV preference, and a French or a UK with a less than 50% preference. That sounds a bit odd to me, considering in Italy there are no material incentives for BEVs. So
yeah, so there's probably so the first graph we show the inherent preference. This is forgetting about incentive, is that we looked at considering how people trade off things. Then we looked at if price was the same, what would they prefer? And I don't know why, but when people look in the report, you see the consumer segment and they vary across countries. But in the UK, France and Germany, there's a lot more consumers that fall into, what we say, possible rejectors. They don't like PHEV. And in Italy, there's a lot more of trailblazers and wealthy adopters. So they're open-minded about that. Much more. I mean, and why, you can only speculate. You know, maybe the media and the narrative is more positive around EVs in Italy than other countries, whichever. But then when we plug the situation today in the model, the fact that Italy doesn't have incentive as much as the other countries, you can see it, the sales lag compared to the other countries. I mean, no, I didn't show it today, but you can see it in the report that Italy indeed lags, I think. So it's nice to finish that question flagging that there's a lot of differences in countries that are more commented on the report.
But it's absolutely fascinating, like you say, and also how you described all of those different, because you had 6 consumer profiles. So very, very interesting. Thank you. I'd love to keep you with me longer. You've been absolutely brilliant, all of you. And this is my first moderation of this new year. So you are the most wonderful and ebullient and informed people to have with me. And you've been so beautifully concise, but also so comprehensive and eloquent at the same time. So I'm allowed to let you go and get lunch if that's what you want, or a gin and tonic, maybe, if that's your thing, who knows? But I don't want the audience to go away. There's still more than 130 of you, and we've got 5 more minutes, and I really, really want us all to listen to our MEP. So I'm going to let all of these lovely, there she is. You've been so patient. Thank you so much. So everyone else can switch off their cameras. I'll keep mine on with you, Caroline Nagtegaal. You are, of course, Shadow Rapporteur on this Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, which has been mentioned probably more than anything else at this event. So give us your 2 pence on what you heard there and some insights, further insights into the regulation or anything else you choose. Thank you. I'm going to stay on this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Katerina, and thank you for having me here. And as a Shadow Rapporteur for the file for the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, I have heard so many interesting things that I could talk for, well, let's say 30 minutes, but then I would get you into trouble, Katerina. So I keep it short also for the audience. But let me start with the study. And I think Celine gave an extraordinary outline how it works, and for me as well, there were some very interesting numbers. And this study, in that case, comes at the right time, so to say, as we in the Parliament are in our own consultation period. I have my own consultations as a Shadow Rapporteur. I have roundtables with stakeholders. So that's very relevant before we publish the draft report. This is in a time which we try again to gain as much as possible input on this topic, and possible before heading into the negotiations. And yes, as Celine said it also, the study shows very clear that consumers are so willing to drive electric and to buy an electric car. I have also an electric car on my own. I love it and I hate it sometimes. So hopefully I can do my best also during the negotiation to make it also for the consumer more easily to not only to drive, but also to use it in your own country, but more also in Europe. So for my work on AFIR, the most important finding in the study I read is that the development of the public charging infrastructure is key to unlocking the whole electric vehicle demand in countries where access is quite low. Because, well, I'm from the Netherlands. We have a fantastic system in the Netherlands, but I think it should be accessible also in other countries. Because not having access to either a private charging point or a reliable public charging infrastructure, it's understandably a significant barrier to adopt the electric vehicle. So, and for consumers who would otherwise willing purchase an electric vehicle. And when the whole charging infrastructure is there, the charging needs to be done with a limited time frame. And I think I go back to what Daniel Mess said about also the electricity grid, is fully right. We need a sort of a modernization of that grid. That's really a must, because we focus to all the digital means, smart charging, to make it more efficient use. And yeah, the fact is that the whole idea of electrification will not stop with cars only. So this makes really sense, and charging needs to have the same customer experience as filling your car with petrol in order to boost the sale and use of the electric vehicles. And I think it's simple as that. So that's why I most of the time say the core and the base, maybe my life motto for this moment during my my role as shadow rapporteur is the customer is king. That's really my life motto. At the same time, I also see that the industry of charging point operators, the CPOs, in many European countries is still a nascent industry, or sometimes it's even non-existent. So the burden should be, let's say, kept as low as possible for them. And if we break the business case in a negative way, electric driving will never fly. And that's my nightmare, so to say. And this applies also most strikingly to the discussion on the other issue, the payment methods. And that's quite difficult. I mentioned quite shortly in the discussion, because here we really need to find a balance to what's the most accessible for consumers and also manageable for indeed that charging point operators. So one minimum standard needs to come, and that's for sure. So we should not end up in a situation where a driver of an electric vehicle can only pay, well, let's say cash in Greece and with Apple Pay in Estonia. So that will not work and will not fly. Before I come to an end, let's take out two other points mentioned by one. Well, I think it was Emily. She mentioned the other report about the CO2 ambitions. And that's exactly what she said is correct. There should be an alignment with that report of the CO2 emission standards for cars. And my colleague Jan Houtma is involved in that one. These two files are really super connected. Another point, Monica's thought about smart charging. I said during my consultation round, a lot of people have some question marks regarding smart charging, regarding vehicle to grid. It's a super important topic, and what she said, it's about integrated thinking, and that's exactly what it should be. Consumers should be part of that future, and hopefully we can have more input about that part as well. My last point I would like to make, or let's say to highlight, is that the deployment of charging points should be maintained with the electric vehicle sales. So the AFIR at this moment mentions already fleet-based criteria for passengers cars, and also for the vans, the light vehicles, as well as distance-based criteria. But what that's the question pops up. What if there is no electric vehicle in use? For example, in the outmost regions, do we really need separate population criteria, or should we define and clarify the fleet-based target further in order to create a minimum coverage of charging points and leave it up to the market afterwards? I'm a liberal, so normally I said the market pick it up, but these are serious questions I still have, and it's something we will have to discuss further in the upcoming months. That's why I end with a sort of a question, because I think that I'm, as a shadow rapporteur, as a member of the European Parliament, the most important thing that I have been in contact with a lot of people who have a lot of experience. That's why a panel and a discussion you organize is so super relevant, because the most important part is to get consumers on board. they will eventually drive the transition to the zero emission mobility. So also to the audience, feel free to contact me, to give your input, to give your ideas or your answers. Because what I said, and I repeat it again, the customer is king. So you are king, and we can do this only together to make our mobility really zero emission. Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you. Don't go away 1 second, and I'm going to close. So don't worry, everyone, just a moment. Quick one, because Daniel threw it your way as he rightly did. 1 sentence answer: public charging, bringing forward, because Amelie, and forgive me if you touched on that, the 10T target, there was this, you know, the platform saying, please bring it forward to 2025. Very rapidly. Yes, no, could be.
Could be, could be. Hopefully we have our targets, but yes, I will not focus only on targets, but see the whole picture. And hopefully that will help to create a wonderful infrastructure in Europe for the electric vehicle.
Okay, and one more thing, you said, I love it and I hate it. You said, okay, I was talking to Monique saying, what else do you like? She was saying, well, Kat, it's air pollution, it's good for it, it smells less. Okay, what's the one thing, only one, that you said you hate it, you want to change?
It's my own problem. My, let's say, X radius, so my range to drive an electric car is very low. So I have to charge many times. So yes, so more charging points, of course, but also more capacity would be very useful, that I can drive a bit longer. From Brussels to Strasbourg, I have to charge twice. It's a hell.
And we don't want you to fall into that trap of having an ICE vehicle as well, which we heard from, to have two, one for the longer and one for the shorter. That's not, as Amelie said, that's not the way the platform wants to go. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your presence here today. And just to say, I was very, gosh, that was news about David Sassoli yesterday. That was, I did want to say that was, whew. So I hadn't mentioned that, and since you are coming from the Parliament, I just wanted to say that before we close. Thank you so much, Caroline. You can take a breather off screen. I'm going to just say to our audience, thank all of our delightful speakers who took the time to be with us today. Very warm thanks to Element Energy and of course the Platform for Electromobility for their very hard work in producing the report and also hosting the event. Yes, the report is available on the platform's website. You can see it. I'm just checking because I've got a message coming in right now that I haven't, there we go. Who else do I want to thank? Of course, the lovely, very lovely technical and policy team behind the scenes who have kept the lights on and, you know, things rolling along nicely. And again, warm thanks to that stakeholder group who gave their time and their feedback throughout the project to make the report as comprehensive and clearly as of the highest quality that it is. And of course, last but not least, thank you so much to all of you. I'm sure you want to eat, but I'm absolutely impressed. There's still 106 of you online, and I think we had 188 at our peak. So very well done for a first event of the season. Without you, of course, there never is an event. Don't forget to share your thoughts. Hashtag InevitableEV more widely on Twitter. I've learned so much as a moderator, so it's been an utter privilege for me. I wish you a lot of passion in your ongoing endeavours. Critically, an optimistic start to what I hope will be for all of us an easier, though roller coaster year. Do stay very, very safe, and I wish you all a very good rest of the week. Thank you very much.